morning and I sounded pretty darn good talking to this man. Now I can do it when I have people that I can talk to who are willing to listen. I hope this whole thing will come up. I did it on TikTok. I think it's important for someone to hear this. And so I'm recording it here on YouTube. Right now I'm doing it unlisted. If it comes up right, oh man, now it's not working. Okay, let's move it up here.
67. I mean, unless you got a pension, and don't touch Social Security till you're 67 to get the full. When it's the right time to pull it out, guys, it varies for everybody, right? Because not everybody's gonna. The past 2 years, I was at 25%. This year was right around 60.
Was doing, plus he was using their computer.
Okay, I gotta back up.
And see what you think about the
Gary LaRae, what up, man? How you guys doing? Dami, what's up, Dami? Take a risk. Don't do it, guys. But that's what we do. We go ahead and help people mitigate the risk to make sure that. Personally, I was there at least a minimum of one of these places, like say.
Okay, I'm just gonna let it play.
Maybe you moved over into a new place and you haven't quite roll that thing out without paying all the penalties and the taxes. Drop me a DM. We can chat. It's not gonna cost you a dime. Thank you, Dirt. Thank you for the follow. So don't forget, we can look at that kind of stuff to see, like I said, where you're at, where you're going, where do you want to be, because that's all important. All that stuff is important, guys.
Maybe he puts me on next. I'm not sure. It's close.
I don't know if he's still there. Is he still there?
There I am. There I am.
Hello.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm good. I wanted to raise something with you and see what you think about this. Now, my ex-husband, he worked for a company for 2.5 years, and they let him go. I think it was just a downturn in the economy, so they let him go. And so he tried to get his 401k from the company, and they told him that he had not been vested working for them for 3 years. So they kept his portion of the 401k money, but he'd been contributing to a 401k. So they kept the portion that they contributed to him. So they gave him money, let him sit on it for. Well, he didn't get to roll it out. It was just with the company.
Right.
But then they kept it. So when he went to try to roll it out from the company, they said he had not been vested. I wondered what you thought about that practice.
Okay, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right at all. For the most part, the vesting schedule, that's the part the company gives you. And they can determine if it's going to be after 1 year, it's going to be 6 years or 7 years. Because usually some of them go, it's like, okay, the first year, there's a few of them that'll give you 100% vesting after the first year. And vesting is just the part the company is going to give you after you've been there, the specified time that they decide, that's free money. Okay? That's whatever they're matching. But as far as his money, whatever he put in, whatever he contributed, that's his money no matter what. No matter he got terminated, he took off, doesn't matter. That is his money. He's supposed to get that.
Well, he did get
Yes, go ahead.
He did get to keep what he contributed. It's just that he didn't get to keep what they contributed. So
that's in the vesting schedule. You'd have to see what the vesting schedule was. Like I said, maybe they should have given him 20% or 40%. But if he doesn't have that vesting schedule, it's gonna be hard. It's gonna be hard to prove anything, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I have learned something when that happened, that they don't always, that there's a time limit that you have to work for a company in order to get the 401k. So I learned something that I guess the companies can just make up their own rules.
They got their own rules. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I've never heard of, but I've never heard of any company keeping it. If you had anything vested, I don't care if it was 20% or 40%, whatever it was. I approach them depending on whether it's Social Security. Equal vote. Drop me a DM. We'll chat. We'll chat. Okay. Yeah. So as far as like I said, I've been like what probably like 4 or 5 different 401ks, and I've always got my vested part. Okay.
Yeah.
Always got it. So whether they let me go or whether I just decided to change jobs, I always got to keep my money. Fortunately, I was there at least a minimum of 5 years in every single one of them, right? So I've always got to keep my money. But I know as far as like the rest of it, if you weren't out there the full time, it just depends on the vesting schedule. Whether you got 20%, 40, 60, 80, or the 100%, he should have got a portion of it. If he was there for 2 years, I always say it about 3 years, he probably should have been at something like between 20 and 40% at least.
I wonder why I don't know, he wouldn't fight it. I asked him about it, he wouldn't fight it. Let me ask you another question. So, what do you think about someone who goes to work and they are encouraging other employees to invest in the stock market while they're working? Because it sounded to me like that's what he was doing. Plus, he was using their computers at work to to trade while he was at work. I mean, do you see is there anything, ethics violations or anything related to that, or encouraging other employees to purchase into stocks and things like that?
Well, who's that? Your husband?
Yeah, well, he's my ex-husband now, but yes.
Okay, he was the one that was encouraging people.
Yes.
Well, the only thing he shouldn't have done it on company time, but other than that, whatever he did on his own time, that's totally up to him.
Yeah, he was doing it on company time, and at the time I didn't think about it, but the Martha Stewart thing was kind of popular. So I didn't, I mean, when I met him, he was doing this at his first job, and I didn't think of it as possibly an ethics violation of some sort. Well, then I started learning about the insider trading and things like that, and then
Yeah,
even, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, not unless he's into the business. If he was on Wall Street or if he has any of his licensing, the SAE, the 663, 65, the 7, any of those licenses, then if he was trading, during company time, for on his own, trying to convince other folks to do something, that might have been up against the ethics. Like I cannot buy an IPO because of my licensing.
He wasn't licensed or anything like that. And
Okay.
actually, he set me up under his account because the brokerage account was new. And at the time, this was back in 2004 timeframe, I believe. And so I didn't have enough money. He at the time, to go under one of those accounts, you had to have like $10,000. So he had what could be an unlicensed brokerage account, but he put me in under him.
That's strange, because usually, like anybody who's licensed with any of those licenses, I mean, it's very, very strict, and everyone is an individual account. You're not allowed to put anybody else in there but your person. They take your social security, all that good stuff. They got your address. They know how much you make, pretty much. They get your bank account number, routing numbers, all that stuff. But that is like an IRA, individual retirement account. Pretty much all of those accounts are individual. Okay, now whether or not he decides to leave them to you, or the person decided to leave it to you as an inheritance or whatever, you're the beneficiary, that's fine. But as far as like, okay, I'm going to contribute to somebody else's account, can't do that.
Well, he had a trust estate planning, and so I don't know, he tried, when we got married, he actually literally tried putting me he put me under taxes one time to try to get a child care tax credit. So when he lost a bunch of money in the .com era time frame, and so he got capital gains. He got the extra $1,500 a year for capital gains. And so sometimes I was thinking that he waited to take that money from the losses until after we got married, because he wasn't taking it before. Then he started doing the capital gains after we got into the relationship and married. So it was almost like it was a strategic thing on his part that when we got married, then he started taking the capital gains. So I didn't know anything about the stock market at the time. I learned about it, and it's like, well, wait a minute, this marriage almost seems like capital gains fraud or a capital gains bride. But with a lot of the things he did, it felt like the money was more important than I was.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of stuff like that, which is like I said, if they're married, fantastic. If they adopted the child, fantastic. But if not, some folks might do it even if they're not hitched up. They try to do it, but these people just get in trouble for nothing. What's up, Jason? So yeah, it's like, and it is unfortunate. But yeah, you should have got that money. Whether it was 20% or 40%, because usually by the third year, you're probably up to like 40%.
Well, with the specific account that he had, now I wonder though if he put me under there and they just had no guidelines that he could add anybody in there under his account. So how you can open an account for kids in there
It's called
for
custodial account.
Yeah, and I wonder if he put me in as a custodial, because the accounts that they were doing were kind of new at the time, and so therefore it kind of opened the door for maybe some bad practices that the brokerage companies weren't thinking about, maybe.
Yeah,
because he could have literally traded in my account. I didn't know that when I opened it. Because he told me, he says you should have a Roth IRA, and I said I don't. And then he was encouraging me to put money into it. Then he started telling me which stocks I should trade. So I tried it and I lost money. Well, then I learned what insider trading is when he told me which stock to buy, and then later on the next day he told me he sold out of that stock. So he says, yeah, but he says I sold out. I took a little loss, and so I learned. Oh my gosh, it's almost like this is insider trading within a marriage. That he's telling me which stock to buy. Then he tells me that he sold out of that stock, but then he said he bought more of it, and so it's like, well, this is how money changes from the wife to him. So if I helped pump that stock up. With buying something, and then he sells out of it, then that's how the money exchanges hands between one person A to person B. And I thought, well, this is really kind of shady. I don't like what's going on here. I stopped after that. After I lost $2,500, I stopped trading. And
the problem is, sorry to interrupt you, but for the most part, when you're doing individual stocks, you have a lot of opportunity for losses, and it's unfortunate. So yeah, that's why a lot of times the company we represent, I mean, we do stuff with Fidelity, Invesco, Vanguard, Frank Templeton, Voya, some of the huge companies that are out there, and what we mostly do is mutual funds. And in a mutual fund, you got anywhere from 50 to 500 different companies that you're invested into. Now, with the individual stocks, they're a lot more risky and a lot more probability to lose money or to make a great sum of money. It's unfortunate, especially if you're doing insider trading stuff. I don't touch that stuff. I can't even buy an IPO.
Well, he actually literally had enough money himself from working. Now, I was just a housewife, married to, going into a second marriage at the time, and I didn't know anything about Wall Street. But he had saved his money. He had matching from the first company because he was fully vested with them, getting all this money. So then he learned from Jim Cramer. Jim Cramer said he himself in his charitable trust had enough money in his charitable trust that he said by himself he can literally move a stock by buying and selling within his charitable trust. He was talking about how they have to reveal with institutional buying, and he said that they tell when they're going to buy and sell. But he said within his trust, which I think the charitable trust had different guidelines than an institutional trust. And so, but he just said, I found that fascinating too. He says, well, individually he can move the stock. So these are things I was thinking about later on. It might not have resonated right away, but I still remember this. It's like, wow, this is where it kind of becomes bad practice, where you can have insider trading in your own marriage. Where people were always making fun back in the day of, well, do you have a stock tip? Can you tell us about something? And then how it could become a bad practice at work if you have a guy telling his employees, well, yeah, why don't you buy into this stock? Then your coworker becomes an insider trader to the other employees, where he makes money from them talking about the stock market. So I was thinking of it, well, did he get fired from his last job for insider trading at work? Possibly, because he was telling me some of his guys he was working with literally did have 401ks, and maybe he got fired. I don't know. I don't know, because I do know he lost his job. So
a lot of fishy stuff.
Yeah. I
mean,
well, thank you for the conversation, and have a nice day. Keep doing what you're doing.
I appreciate you guys. But you just that was a little bit far and beyond as far as what he was doing, because he was probably pushing up some stock and then pulling it out the next day after people were buying it, stuff like that. That's what people do. That's what happens at the Bitcoin stuff.
There, he mentioned Bitcoin.
That's the way it works out, guys. So you got to be really, really careful, man. There's a lot of that crazy stuff going on, man. But yeah, that's what you guys don't invest in the market, especially if you don't know what you're doing. Do not go investing into the market, because that is pretty.
I agree with him.
The market can be a scary place, man. I mean, we're talking over here as far as buy the mutual.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there, and I'm going to add in a little bit more commentary afterwards, because I just want to say that, at the time that I met him in 2003, he probably had advanced knowledge related to the stock market, because the 401ks, I think they came around in the 1980s time frame. And so he probably knew quite a bit more, but he was playing, it seemed like he was playing kind of naive with me. For me, I had no idea what Wall Street was. And he told me that he said something about that I said that I was interested in Wall Street. And, which the thing is, I was a military spouse. I was a housewife my whole life. I was in Germany listening to Jim Cramer on AF. Well, we had an alternative station. We were watching CNBC while we were over in Germany. That was the only additional station I think we had, maybe a couple of them. But we had an AFN, then we had CNBC, which seemed to be pretty current. And so I was familiar with Jim Cramer. That's back in the time when he was in the early morning show. And, so I was kind of wanting some, I was missing the United States a little bit. Even though there was other people who were in the military and spoke English, I was kind of missing the TV a little bit at that time. And so I was watching the financials, and I found it kind of entertaining, actually. It was a little bit entertaining. But I wasn't, I was just learning about stocks and the .com, and Jim Cramer kept projecting the .com bust all the time. And so even back then, and this would have been 1997, probably 1998 time frame, when he was talking about the .com and projecting a big bubble. And that's all he talked about, was a big bubble and the .com, the websites. He said they were going to burst. And that was at the time when they said there was a guy, and I remember a lot of other people might remember this, I don't know, where he took and he put just a bunch of advertising on his page, and he became a millionaire that way, just putting advertising on his page. And so that's what they were kind of talking about. So they were familiar with the advertising side of it. I wasn't. Now, once YouTube came around, I learned about the advertising side of it. I learned about the inequalities of the networks, so it was sort of a progressional thing. We had the internet. The internet became competition to legacy media and cable TV, but I didn't realize there would be such a pushback of that legacy media wanted to put the internet out of business, which that really felt like that's what the pushback has been. So where independent people who are not part of a network are unable to actually make a living on the internet doing what the cable TV people are doing. So right now a lot of people will say, "Oh, you have a First Amendment. You're on the internet," and then but they still want to dictate and use their bad practices of network practices where they all do one topic only, which benefits them, and then they want to use the foreign influencing. Now, we wouldn't have had the foreign influencing for the past 20-25 years, and that's what they've talked about on TV. On cable TV, on these commercials, on these shows, and it's like, well, right now it makes a whole lot of sense, but I'm raising issue to something else that came about with the 401ks that I think most people didn't think about with the 401ks, because most military don't have a 401k. If someone was to contribute to what they have, the thrift savings plan, which is basically an account, then it's the taxpayers paying for it. And the taxpayers do, you could call it that, you could use that as an example, appropriated funding from the taxpayers, because Congress holds the purse strings. So we could look at it like that. So the military has a funding for their retirement plan. Social Security is a retirement plan, but at the same time, then we have inflation taking place, and that's not working for everybody. And then we have, I remember when under Obama, they were talking about a donut hole for senior citizens. Well, I call it a donut hole for middle United States from 18 until the grave. So when we have inflation, everybody is priced out of living someplace and becomes homeless. And that's the thing I've been addressing, which is something much larger. So after YouTube, I started saying, well, wait a minute, I see a potential here for some bad practices taking place, and then my kids are being left behind, because that's what they're talking about on Facebook, especially people in the military. And I'm starting to think it's like, well, why is housing going up so high? How come the house that I moved into in 2006 was more expensive, or less square footage, but more expensive than the house that my ex-husband was in, which his house didn't go up in value. So actually, there was something shady about that too, because he took money out on a margin loan, which, okay, yeah, there's something shady about this part too. So when I met him, he had a $40,000 loan on his house. And so it sounded like he was carrying a loan on his house so he got some sort of tax breaks, because he said he doesn't get any tax breaks once the house is paid off. And I always thought, well, wouldn't it be cheaper if you have the house paid off instead of carrying a loan? But for some reason, he was carrying a loan. Then come to find out later on, he borrowed money on margin out of his 401k. Now, borrowing money on margin is a very bad practice, because of the fact that you have to pay that money back right away if you don't make the money that you're supposed to make. So that's borrowing the money at a higher percentage rate from the brokerage company. So I'm not sure if that's addressed by Dodd-Frank, but the thing is it's basically then they're breaking the individual person and taking money back from them at a 9 to 15, 20% loan sharking is basically what it amounts to. And so anyway, he was telling me that the woman he worked with, it was his work lover that he was having an affair with. So he had both of them had took money out on margin. So I don't know what she did. I don't even know if she had any money left. Now, she's since passed away a few years ago. But he actually said that he was teaching her how to trade because she had a 401k too. And so it sounded like he was doing things inside of her account for her. So he probably had her all messed up, and I don't know if she lost money. Eventually, see, when I talk this out even further, this wasn't even things I was thinking about 5 years ago. I was thinking about what he was doing to me. But at the same time, then these are things that I remember what he was also doing to his coworker, the woman that he was having this work relationship with. So he could literally be managing her account and have her account buying things, and then she buys something, and then he sells out of something that he owns that he recommended to her to buy. So this is what I call the work insider trading, because he's the one who told me, he said that when the companies have new products, which was the 401ks, and this is where I'm speculating. He and I are not together anymore, and these are questions he would not answer. He would literally get upset. You know, he would stop short, even when the relationship was good, he would stop short of telling me everything. What he would tell me is that he said the bosses would come down from corporate and tell me that I need to go out and pitch these products to the employees and tell them that this is what the company wants to do. And he said, I knew some of this stuff was not good for them, but I would just have to shake my head up and down and say, yes, sir, no, sir, thank you, sir, have a good day, sir. So he wouldn't challenge the status quo related to things that may not be good for the employees. You know, so, but for them, the company was paying them matching stock options. Now, at one point, the company kept their 401k investments. They would sit on their money. This is what my mother told me. She had her company held her money for her. She couldn't roll it out, so they were holding it for her. And I had asked her at one point if she ever took it out, and she said no. I said, well, how come? How come you can't take it out and roll it into a brokerage account? And she says they just won't let me. They hold on to it for me, and then they pay out. Where my second husband, he had he worked for the same company in that time frame for 27 years, I think, around that time frame. Over 25 was early retirement for them if they wanted to retire, which I think that he ended up getting fired somewhat because he was having a relationship with his coworker, which he said that the relationship was permitted because of the fact he wasn't a direct line supervisor of her. He said at the time the relationship started, he worked on the dock and she was working on the line. So he said they weren't working in the same part of the company, which at any given time on a shift, they might have 9 employees. 9 employees. Now he was talking about how he was having relations with her at night. So he was a dock worker at night, it sounded like. And so he was having intimate relations with her. He said that there was places within the factory. He said they didn't have any cameras in there. And he said that they would go have relations on the graveyard shift because there were so few people in there working. And so he was the one. Eventually, he was promoted to being a supervisor. And I don't know if they got caught or what. So, you know, people knew that they were having a relationship. And so eventually he was put in charge of her. They were working on the same shift. And then he said that someone else came in, a lab guy or somebody. There was a change of hand of their plant managers. And so they had no plant manager for a while. And there was this lab guy who kind of took over as the plant manager, and he came in and got involved with the woman that my ex-husband was involved with at work. And so my ex-husband didn't like that. And so that's at the time then where I met him on Yahoo Dating. Now, I wasn't able to formulate and put all this together until later, because I was going to college. I was just done with college at the time. I was trying to find a job that was sustainable for me and my son. Not realizing that my ex-husband was a predator in a big sort of way to women with kids, and he is. He was and he is, for financial reasons. So it's just one of those things that when they get a taste of money is a taste of blood for some men, especially ones that want to exploit women. And, the thing is, I've seen males from the United States fly down to the Philippines. There's an example on YouTube. They fly to the Philippines just to get a woman, just to have a relationship with her, because they say women in the United States are so far gone that they can't deal with them. And so they just want someone they can easily manipulate and exploit. They don't want someone who's going to speak to them. They just want kind of a silence relationship where the woman doesn't talk to the man or express anything in any way whatsoever. He wants to be the one in charge all the time. And so, I'm just sharing this based off my life experience, which I have a right to do that, and sharing things that are bad practices, which this is things that my husband told me at the time that we were together in a relationship. And so he did tell me that he thought when this guy came in, he was a lab guy from Canada, and he said that the woman he was involved with, he said they were involved for 12 years. He said that he thought maybe someone had filed a grievance. He wasn't sure who, with them. Now, he said he found out there was a guy who was making more money than him. He left his pay thing on. He said they were told by the company they weren't supposed to discuss how much each other was making. So he said one day the guy, I think his name was Bruce, because he was talking about him all the time. Now he came in after him, and my husband was mad. Because he said that the guy was making like $7,000 a year more than him, or he was making $7,000 a year more than him and the woman. Now he said he and the woman came in at the same time around affirmative action around the 1970s, so they were hired about the same time. And he said that they were just working all the time, working swing shift all the time. And he said that he really didn't have much time for dating, and so I guess he dated at work. He used work as his place to pick up women and to have relationships with. So he would have a relationship at home, and then he would have a relationship at work, because he said he had such a high libido, that he just needed it all the time. So which it sounds to me like he wasn't kept busy enough at work. Now, he said they cut back on HR, and more of the work was passed to the computer. Now, he said that they would use the computer in a way where they would have them playing games and doing things on the computer, probably watching movies too. He said they would let them do it, and then they would take it away from them once they learned how to use the computer. He said then they would say it's a practice that they can no longer do. And so, I don't think his work computers were updated enough that he would have had the access to his 401k. That was at a time where they would have called in. So when I met him in 2003, he was telling me about how they had to call in and things like that. We barely even had laptops. I mean, I had an old laptop that it wasn't a touch screen. It was kind of thick a little bit. And it didn't have very much drive on it, very much CPU memory on that, RAM, things like that. And I don't know, eventually I think I got rid of it because it just became outdated, and I think I threw it away. I don't even remember what happened to it. I think I threw it away probably. I don't know if I smashed it up, threw it away. I'm not sure exactly what I did with it, or if I just gave it away to somebody. I'm not quite sure. And now I've learned since then not to give things away. But so he was so he was just, mixing all this stuff up together, and he was learning about the 401ks. Now, I think Jim Cramer started on TV. I'm not sure when he started with his show. I think his show started around 2004. His nighttime show, Mad Money. He was on, now keep in mind, he was on CNBC when I was in Germany in between 1996 to 1999. And so my second husband was really deep into the trust estate planning and things like that, premarital agreements, protecting his money. He didn't want me to have anything unless he died. And so it was almost like he was treating a relationship, a companionship, and a marriage as a business in so much of a way. He didn't want a spouse to get anything at all, and he wanted someone he could completely control and treat like a child. And so when we hear the man in this video and I'm talking to him and expressing what I'm expressing about everything that my husband did, placing me underneath his daughter related to the child care tax credit, he wanted to get that. Now, maybe that worked for him at one time where he had a companion and he could get the child care tax credit for a wife. He wanted to put my son under there in the worst sort of way. And I told him, I said, well, his dad gets that credit. I said, I can't even write my own son off as a tax credit because because my ex-husband, that's something in the divorce that we agreed upon, that he would get to do it. And so, I mean, so my husband put me under there instead as a child. He was trying to claim me as a child just to get more money from taxes. And you know, the thing I've often thought, I thought, well, yeah, $1,500 is money, but at the same time, it's like, well, it's not like it's that much money. I mean, he was making boatloads of money. He told me that there was times he was making anywhere from he had a base salary when I met him, I think of around $70,000. Now, when he did overtime, he could make upwards towards $100,000 just doing overtime. And so he always told me, he says, well, I can, you know, and this is where the narcissist side of him comes in. He's like, well, I just make so much money. He says, I have more money than time. He says, if I want to be with a woman, he says, I can just take her on a weekend trip or schedule a little vacation, and I'll just pick out a woman, take her with me, fly her someplace. And he says, you know, and it's kind of like, well, he was talking about it in terms of transactional services and prostitution. And I often wondered, I thought, well, did the woman know that she was being used as a prostitute? Well, probably no. And at the time I met him, there was a nurse that he was dating, and I actually had thought he would become involved with her. So I thought maybe he would be involved with his work lover. And so I was trying to find out, like, what, you know, because he told me he didn't want drama. He is the one who brought the drama. He's the one who brought the drama. So, and in hindsight, as it came out more and more, I really kind of wish I hadn't proceeded with the relationship. And so anyway, but he told me he didn't want to be involved with someone that he knew anymore. He said he wanted somebody new, but he brought all the drama to me because he's the drama. And so I asked him, I said, well, are you sure you're not in love with the woman that you're working with? And he's like, no, she's an alcoholic. She smokes and drinks, and I don't like anybody who smokes and drinks. He says, I can't stand being around a woman who smokes. But yet she was good enough for him to have a sex relationship with. And I kind of suspected he smelled like smoke a few times after I had already moved in with him, which meant I had no way to get out of the relationship because I no longer had a job. So I had to have a job, a way to escape, to get out of the relationship. And I was kind of scared to ask my parents again, you know, because of the fact I was thinking, there came a point I was thinking that it's like, I get into this relationship, now I'm stuck. Now, he was nice to me when we were in the place when I was close to my parents. Now, he started being shitty when he isolated me and we moved far, far away. That's when he started becoming crappier and crappier over time because he knew I had no help and no way out of the relationship. And so, but at the time in 2003 when I met him, there was this nurse. And so I asked him about the nurse. Now, he said he'd been involved with her for 30 years. And I said, and so he said that she liked dating men like him. And now the internet's telling me I can't describe that specifically because a lot of them don't like me saying that word specifically because they tell me it's racist now. And so anyway, I will avoid saying that word in this video, but I think you guys will probably figure it out because I myself am a Caucasian woman. Some people call me white. I'm not going to say anything further about what he is other than an ass bastard and an asshole. So he was dating this woman who was a nurse, very successful. She had her own house. And so he had a birthday, his birthday was around the end of the year. And he had an event scheduled to fly to Las Vegas. Now he told me, this was about 6 weeks after I met him, he told me, he says, and he actually gave me a key to his house where I could have literally been inside of his house while he was gone with her, which I found that kind of odd, but he did. He gave me a key to his house right away. For some reason, he trusted me. I don't know why, but he gave me a key to his house where I could enter into his house, which I didn't. I had the key to his house for a long, long time. And he says, well, why don't you go over to the house? And I said, well, it's weird me going to the house with you not there. He says, you can go over there. Well, let me finish the other part of the story, though, first, before I finish with the key. So he goes with this nurse to Las Vegas for his birthday. And so then I didn't think about the transactional thing. You know, it's been over all these decades, and then with Donald Trump and the transactional services. And I used to think that was a joke, but no, it's true. I mean, it's really true that the men have this type of sentiment about women where they can use a transactional service. You know, even when Fannie Willis says that up there in Atlanta that her work partner Nate Wade, he's not worth anything more than a sandwich. You know, because that's the transactional part of it. Where a man, even my dad had said things. He says, you don't owe a man anything. You don't owe, well, he said a boy at the time because we were kids. You don't owe a boy anything for taking you out on a date. I didn't know what he meant. And so that was even a thing back then, the transactional services where a boy or a man would say, well, I bought you some lunch, now you owe me some sex. And that's what my dad was alluding to. And my dad then told me, that's where my dad told me, he says, your knee, if a boy tries anything with you, you have your knee and your foot, you can kick him in the groin, and that's going to take a man down. And he was telling me that all the time. Then Dad later on said, well, your car, he says, if a man's trying to do anything to you, your car is a deadly weapon. Just run him over. That's what Dad told me, just run him over. So then, okay, so let's get back to the key part. So my former husband, I was just meeting him, but, getting to know him in 2003, but he escalated the relationship pretty quickly. So he gave me the key to his house, and so I didn't go over to his house. And so there was one night he told me, he says, well, why don't you go on over there? He says, you can go on over there if you want to. And I said, why? And I said, and he says, well, go, just you and your son. I said, can I bring my son? He's like, yeah. So I brought my son, I went over there. Then he starts calling me to his house. And that's where he starts having me get into his brokerage account, looking through there. He gives me the passwords to everything, the key to his house. And so he's really, really embracing. He says, I'm tired. He was 48 years old. He says, I'm tired of the life that I've been living. He says, I'm really tired of it. He says, there's all this drama. And he says, I just want to know somebody who doesn't have anything to do, I want to be with a woman who doesn't have anything to do with my past. Pretty much that's kind of what he was saying. And So I was trying to find out if he, even though this work lover seemed to still have ties to him, she got involved with the guy from Canada. He seemed upset about that. I kept asking him. I said, "Are you sure you're not in love with her?" Because I was trying to get a feel for him to see if he was in love with her. Well, then I was asking him about the nurse, and I said, "Well," but he told me, he says, "Well, if you have any relationships or anything like that," which I told him I didn't. I said, "I'm not involved with anybody at all, nothing serious at all." He says, "Okay, if you do," he says, tie it up and end it, and then we're going to be together." And so he moved it along really fast within about 6 weeks, gave me the key to the house, gave me the passwords to his computer. He says, "I want you to trust me." That's what he said. "I want you to trust me." So he was giving me access to everything, as a measure of trust, which right now, I'm evaluating this practice as a huge red flag, as a way to move something along really, really fast, possibly even as a manipulative tactic that could be used on children. Now, he was always telling me he saw me as naive. He said, at the beginning somewhat. I mean, I'm trying to think, I think he used that word, in kind of a soft, gentle way of naive. He said, and I got the idea then that he was looking for somebody who was, submissive in a way, and didn't talk a whole lot. And the thing is, I wrote a lot of stuff on the internet. I talked to other people. It wasn't that I didn't talk. He was just gone to work. Now, he talked all the time. He would call me up on the phone. I was overloaded by him calling me. So when I was at the house, he would call me like at my bedtime. And when he was working graveyard, he would want to talk to me like till 1 or 2 in the morning. He was on the phone all the time. So I didn't see that as a red flag. I do now. Because if I'm on the phone with him, then he knows that there's nobody else there. So I don't know, maybe it was a thing that he was trying to prove that he cared about me in some way that much. I don't know. I know he talked on the phone all the time to me. He would call and talk for hours. And I would sometimes I wanted to break. I was overloaded by him calling me and talking to me for 2 and 3 hours at a time on the phone. And there was something else. Oh, there was something else that happened. He and his coworker, so they actually, the guy that came from Canada, he scheduled this thing for him and the coworker. Now let me say this too, the work did give him a cell phone. Which he said he didn't like, but they wanted them to have a cell phone on them all the time if they needed to call and talk to their employee. The coworkers, then he didn't like it, and so he would sometimes shut the phone off so they couldn't call, because he said he didn't want them calling, but they still called his house number if they needed help with something. So in the time frame, the guy from Canada that his ex-work lover got involved with, she was just kind of being passed around the plant. That's basically what was happening. She was married, being passed around the plant. Her husband didn't treat her well. He was physically abusive to her. My ex-husband wouldn't call the police, when she came to work with bruises on her face, and she was trying to cover them up with makeup and things like that. And so anyway, I think it was 2004, 2005 timeframe. They decided to send him to this world-class management near Hope, Arkansas. I think Texarkana, Texas, maybe. So they sent the two of them together. So the guy from Canada, he eventually married the coworker. And so my ex-husband was really upset because he was making fun of her for getting involved with the guy from Canada. But apparently he wanted a real relationship, and he liked what he saw in her. And unless he was trying to get, the only thing I've rationalized since then is because he's from Canada, that he was trying to get American citizenship so he could bring a company into the United States, because he had a wife and kids in Canada. Now, the only thing which he did marry this woman. And so I never would have thought that he was wanting to get married to her as a means to getting citizenship and that he had money, because some of the research I did when I looked it up, it led me to something that he was actually the manager of the company in Canada, that he had investment ties to the company. But see, what happened was he came down to the United States to where my ex-husband was at, and that company went out of business. And so then, so it went from, so it had changed names 3 times. So I didn't know anything about the SPACs, the special purpose acquisition companies, or divesting. So it sounded like it was a company because they didn't upgrade their factory, or they tried to, but it was old and they needed to basically just build a whole new factory if they were going to do what they were going to keep doing. And so the guy from Canada, they bought the company and then they closed it and then they moved it to Canada. And but that's what eventually happened. But in the meantime, though, when the company was still open, he sent his future wife and my future husband at the time together to this place near Hope, Arkansas. And so my husband was calling me and he told me that he wanted to go hang out with his coworker, and he said that she was talking on the phone the whole time to the guy from Canada, and he said he was a little bit upset because he had nobody to talk to, so he called and talked to me. So I guess I was his nobody to talk to, because he was on a vacation with his former work lover. And so it was almost like the guy from Canada was putting her to the test to see if she was going to sleep with him, possibly. I don't know. But my husband said nothing happened between them. He said she was drunk the whole time, smoking and drinking, and I don't know. I have no idea. I found it odd that the guy who was from Canada actually sent him and her together to this thing at the same time. But he did. So they said they toured around this plant and looked at it and did some classes and things. They even took pictures. He showed me, my husband had a picture of all of them at this place down in the Arkansas plant. They were doing things down there and learning things. And so then they go back. And so in the process, then my husband was at work one night, and he was watching a movie at work, which he said that was normal. He said it was perfectly normal. They always did that. He said they did it to try to stay awake. And so he said that that the guy who was the manager, he was the lab guy actually, the plant manager was gone. So he came in and at night, in the middle of the night, and caught my husband watching a movie. He wanted him to come in the next day, which is his day off. He had plans. He told him no. So he gave him a 30-day, I think it was a 30-day suspension. 30-day suspension. I don't know if it was with pay or without pay. They gave him a 30-day suspension. And so, and then that hinged with, so he was off for like 3 months, because he's around the end of the year, he took off, the holidays, he would take off like for 2 months or at least a month. He said every year around the holidays he took off for at least a month, 2 weeks to a month he'd take off and he'd go do something. So he had a whole bunch of time off. Well, then when he gets back, by then they had a new manager. They said he was from California. And so the lab guy, which he had no idea who the lab guy was, but he had ties with this other company, the company that took over in Canada. I learned that later, a few years later, when doing some research on LinkedIn. I never told my husband that he had ties to Canada. He never knew that. And so the other guy from California came in, and but my husband told him no, he wasn't going back to work, and then he got the suspension. So when he came back, they wrote up this what they call the last chance agreement, wanted him to sign it. So he went into work with their meeting, and he had this little Dell recorder handheld type device thingy, and so he recorded them at work. I don't know if he thought he was going to get an attorney or I listened to the meeting, didn't hear anything. So he had it on when he went into the meeting. I listened to the whole thing. I really didn't hear anything that sounded suspicious with what they were doing. You know, he was just explaining to me how, well, yeah, maybe they were gaslighting him into quitting. I think, you know, when I talk this out, they very well could have been gaslighting him into quitting. The truth is, he needed to have a job. You know, but yeah, I could say that. You know, if I had to argue this with another person other than my ex-husband, I would say they were gaslighting a person who was reaching the age of towards 50 into quitting. So I met him when he was 48. So he was about 51 years old when they were doing all of this, three years before we got married, actually. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say that because the last year before he got the new job, he was off for a year. And so I put his resume on Career Builder. And so anyway, so he was watching a movie. They told it, the one guy who was the lab guy from Canada that was involved with his ex-work lover, he told him to go to work. My husband said no, he wasn't going to go to work the next day because he had a day scheduled off and he wasn't going to work. He said they always had watched movies before and it was never a problem. So he just changed the policy. Plus he said they never come in at night either. No boss had ever come in at night to see anything that they were doing. And so he found it kind of odd that this guy, he said he was paranoid and stuff like that. And he ended up, I think he ended up losing his job because of that. Now, he blamed his ex-work lover for that. He blamed her for it. He says, I think that she was telling him everything that was going on. He says, like 3 years later, then it comes out that he eventually told me he thought somebody at his work had filed a sexual harassment or something going on. He started telling me, he says I think that the company itself, that someone had filed a sexual harassment. They were trying to split us up or get us all to quit or something like that. Oh, and I do have to say, he did get the extra, him and the woman did get the extra $7,000 pay. So he got that shortly after he tried to stiff his ex-companion out of child support. So she had to take him to court to get child support for their daughter. Well, then he got extra money at the time then, which made up the difference. And so but he was upset because he wasn't getting that extra money. So it was nothing gained or lost. It was just that he was paying his ex-companion the amount of money. I think he probably even got more money than what he was paying her anyway. It wasn't like she was getting that much money. It was like maybe $650 or $700 at the most, for child support. But that's more than I got. I only got $132. And I told him, I said, well, you're paying her child support of over $600. I only got $132, and that doesn't go very far. So what I'm expressing in hindsight to myself is inequalities in the support from the weaponized court system, because my ex-husband, and I was tolerant. I knew he was in the military. He didn't make much money. And I couldn't just take all of his money. But the court, I knew the courts weren't going to do that. But at the same time, the military was very compassionate about, and they were always telling us, they said that they knew the civilian communities were very hard to get along with because they get set in their ways and they wouldn't hire people. And clearly they won't even hire people who have been living in the community before. So when you go back, they have a hard time getting a job. Now, I've always raised the issue, there's not enough jobs for everyone to be in the payroll on the payroll of someone else. And so anyway, it sounded like all of the people there, except for the one guy, got fired. So the guy they brought in, Bruce, everybody but him got fired. So the woman got fired. She got fired, lost her job. She ended up getting married to the guy from Canada. Oh, and this was the thing I raised about the capital gains, because so my husband, yeah, I think we were married, or we weren't married quite yet, but he was telling me that his ex-work lover was flying up to Canada and that she met the kids and the wife of this guy and that they got along great. They still got along. And I said, well, that's odd. You know, I wasn't thinking of him wanting citizenship because he had money he wanted to invest in the United States. I wasn't thinking about that. Now I do, you know, so I don't know if he was married to her long enough to get citizenship. So there's a possibility there that he only wanted to be married to her for citizenship. So because he had a company in Canada, his company was a wallboard company in Canada. And so I wasn't even thinking about that at the time at all. But later on, it kind of dawned on me that, yeah, I mean, that's a possibility now, because it's like, okay, so he divorces his wife. He introduces his future wife to his wife and kids. Now so his wife and kids have to suffer through him trying to gain citizenship for the United States. So that would be a conspiracy, possibly a conspiracy or a crime, fraudulent marriage, which now she's passed away and she can't testify to anything against that. But in turn, he did get married to her. Now they did live, I think right after, no, so my husband was saying that if the woman did get married to the guy, she couldn't work when she went to Canada. So I think they lived for maybe 3 years in Canada after they got married. So I don't know how that plays out with a citizenship for the United States, if him being married to her in Canada would relate towards a legal marriage for him. Then he goes back to the United States. So eventually they moved back to the town where he met her, where I was living at too. But my husband and I had since moved. And so the woman, once they moved back to the area where everybody was at, in the Midwest, myself and my husband had moved to a completely different state. So she contacted him on Facebook, asked him if he was still gone, and he writes back and tells her yes. So he was showing me these conversations on Facebook that she had moved back to that area. And so she had cancer at the time. And so my ex-husband said she had to have cancer surgery. And so she had cancer. Eventually she died from cancer. And so then now, but in the meantime, this guy from Canada, I believe he has citizenship based off of her marriage, the marriage to her possibly. So that wasn't even on my register at the time, you know, which these are just things that I think about that goes through my mind, you know, so I don't have anything of myself to think about, or a way to get out of things, you know, but, but the company is gone. So the company that all of them were under is completely gone. It's closed up in the area of the Midwest. That there was a couple of other companies that was up there that were still plugging away and going. So I believe then that they were possibly, where's the place at? Nova Scotia is where they were getting their wallboard from. So he was always talking about that the new place was getting their wallboard, and they were getting rock from Nova Scotia, Canada, I believe. They'd have it come down by ship. Now I'm not sure where it came from there in the Midwest. Oh, they lived on a strip of gypsum there in that area. and they were always having collapses and things like that. They were trying to fill it back up, it sounded like, or do something. Oh, putting in wood. It sounded like wood to prevent the land from collapsing, but eventually it was just collapsing because they would make like caves. You know, sometimes it would just be like digging a quarry in a pit, strip mining, things like that. But sometimes it just made it unstable because what they would do, they would drive a hole, and some of the holes then were porous. They'd make them underneath the road, then the roads would collapse, and so it was causing a lot of problems in the area. So I don't know if the wallboard companies are going to completely go away or how they're going to do it, but a lot of the holes, though, then they would turn them into fishing sporting areas, because through the area then there would be these great big tall piles of dirt and stuff. So they used it for a lot of different things. You know, there was a lot of water there, and you know, I even watched one of them. They were digging a new one, another new hole. So it's not. So when people say that we're not doing this strip mining inside of the United States, it is going on. It absolutely is going on. And so, but eventually she passed away. His work lover passed away a few years ago. I think the end of 2023. And so this guy from Canada potentially now has American citizenship through marriage, which potentially could be fraudulent, just like my second husband's marriage to me, I believe, is fraudulent when I describe everything so fluidly and clearly at the beginning of this video to the man I'm talking to on TikTok this morning.